December the 7th, 1941. The smoke rising from the shattered hull of the USS Arizona had barely begun to clear before a wave of absolute desperation washed over the United States. America was thrust into a global conflict it was woefully unprepared for, and the military desperately needed a way to strike back at the Japanese Empire. In times of supreme crisis, the line between absolute genius and utter insanity tends to blur. The government opened its doors to any and all ideas, no matter how unconventional, that might give the Allies an edge. Enter Dr. Lytle S. Adams, a 37-year-old dental surgeon from Irwin, Pennsylvania. Dr. Adams was not a military tactician, nor was he a weapons engineer. He was a dentist on a road trip. Just weeks before the attack on Pearl Harbor, Adams had been on vacation in New Mexico, standing in awe at the mouth of the Carlsbad Caverns. He had watched millions of Mexican free-tailed bats pour out of the darkness into the twilight sky, moving like a massive, living tornado. When Adams heard the news of Pearl Harbor over his car radio on his drive back east, his mind connected to entirely unrelated concepts. First, he knew that the infrastructure of Japan's major industrial cities was heavily reliant on bamboo, paper, and highly flammable wood. Second, he knew that bats inherently seek out dark, hidden spaces in the eaves and attics of structures when dawn approaches. By the time Dr. Adams reached Pennsylvania, he had formulated one of the most bizarre and highly classified weapons programs in human history. He envisioned outfitting millions of bats with miniature incendiary bombs and dropping them over Tokyo. The logic, twisted as it was structurally sound in his mind. The bats would be dropped in a specialized casing before dawn. As they fell, the casing would open, and the bats would awaken from forced hibernation. Instinct would take over. Millions of flying mammals would scatter across the city, diving into the attics, barns, and factory rafters of the Japanese capital to hide from the daylight. Shortly after, the timed explosives strapped to their bodies would detonate simultaneously, instead of a single, localized explosion from a conventional bomb. You would have hundreds of thousands of individual fires breaking out inside the infrastructure of the city, utterly overwhelming any firefighting response and burning the metropolis to the ground from the inside out. It was biological warfare married to arson. In January of 19... Dr. Adams drafted a passionate letter outlining his bat bomb theory and sent it directly to the White House. In any normal era, such a letter would have been immediately discarded into the incinerator. But this was the aftermath of Pearl Harbor. The letter landed on the desk of First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who found the concept intriguing enough to pass it along to the president. Franklin D. Roosevelt read the dentist's proposal and, astonishingly, forwarded it to Colonel William Wild Bill Donovan, the head of the Coordinator of Information, which would soon become the OSS and eventually the CIA. Roosevelt attached a brief but historically immortal memo that read, "This man is not a nut. It sounds like a perfectly wild idea, but is worth looking into." With those words from the Commander-in-Chief, the United States government officially greenlit Project X-Ray. Dr. Adams suddenly found himself pulled from his dental practice and thrust into a top-secret military operation alongside some of the greatest scientific minds in the country. The first challenge was biological. They needed the right bat. Adams and a team of field biologists scoured the caves of Texas and the American Southwest, capturing and testing various species. They settled on the Mexican free-tailed bat. These creatures were perfect for the grim task at hand. They were incredibly abundant, numbering in the tens of millions in single cave systems. They were small but mighty, capable of carrying more than their own body weight in flight. And, most crucially, they could be forced into a state of deep hibernation if the temperature was artificially dropped, allowing them to be transported and packed into bomb casings without dying or panicking. But a bat is only a delivery system. The payload required an entirely new kind of weapon. For this, the military brought in Louis Fieser, a brilliant chemist from Harvard University, who was actively developing a devastating new substance known as napalm. Fieser was tasked with creating an incendiary device small enough for a bat to carry, but powerful enough to ignite a structural fire. What he designed was a marvel of miniature lethal engineering. He created a tiny, pill-shaped celluloid casing that weighed just 17.5 grams. Inside this tiny bomb was a thickened kerosene mixture. To ensure the bomb didn't go off while the bat was in the air, Fieser designed a microscopic time delay mechanism. It consisted of a spring-loaded firing pin held back by a thin steel wire. Before the bat was deployed, a drop of copper chloride solution was injected into the mechanism. The chemical would slowly eat through the steel wire. Depending on the concentration of the chemical, the scientists could precisely time the detonation to occur exactly. When the bat was safely roosting in a Japanese attic, the final piece of the puzzle was the deployment vehicle. A sheet metal bomb casing was designed to be dropped from a B-24 bomber. Inside the casing were 26 stacked circular trays, resembling an egg carton, which could hold exactly 1,040 hibernating bats. The entire casing was refrigerated to keep the bats asleep. The plan was to drop this casing from 10,000 feet. At 1,000 feet, parachutes would deploy. The sides of the casing would fall away, and the warming air would wake the bats up. The bats would then detach themselves from the trays, take flight, and seek shelter in the city below. The United States military had effectively weaponized Mother Nature, turning a harmless flying mammal into a self-guiding, stealth incendiary drone. By the spring of 1943, the blueprints were finalized. The chemical payloads were synthesized, and thousands of bats had been collected. It was time to move the operation out of the laboratory and into the blistering heat of the Peacer American desert to see if a dentist's wild dream could actually win a world war. Moving Project X-ray from theoretical science to active military testing proved to be a chaotic transition. The Army Air Force took initial control of the experiments, setting up operations at the Carlsbad Army Airfield in New Mexico in May of 1943. The transition immediately highlighted the sheer absurdity of trying to coordinate a military operation with thousands of wild, unpredictable animals. Handlers struggled to find the perfect temperature to keep the bats dormant. If it was too cold, the bats would freeze to death. If it was too warm, they would wake up prematurely, thrash around, and damage the delicate napalm payloads surgically attached to their chests with string and surgical clips. The underlying madness of the project reached a boiling point on May 15, 1943. A routine testing day was scheduled at the Carlsbad Auxiliary Field. The team had successfully armed several dozen bats with live, chemically activated napalm incendiaries. However, before they could be loaded into the bomber for a drop test, the desert heat caused the transport containers to warm up faster than anticipated. The bats woke up, and they were terrified. Before the handlers could secure the area, a large group of armed bats escaped their cages, following their natural instincts to find a dark, high place to hide from the blinding New Mexico sun. The bats scattered across the military base. They flew under the eaves of the barracks. They squeezed into the rafters of the newly built control tower. One particularly ambitious bat, allegedly, found its way under the hood of a visiting general's staff car. The scientists and military personnel could do nothing but watch in absolute horror as the copper chloride silently ate away at the steel wires strapped to the escaped bats. Minutes later, the base began to detonate. Plumes of black smoke erupted from the barracks. The control tower caught fire and quickly became a towering inferno. The highly classified, top-secret military installation was effectively burned to the foundation by its own test subjects. The incident was a complete logistical disaster, but ironically, it was also a flawless proof of concept. The bats had done exactly what Dr. Adams predicted they would do. They sought out structural vulnerabilities, bypassed all defenses, and the napalm bombs worked perfectly. However, the Army Air Force had lost its patience with the uncontrollable nature of the flying mammals. Embarrassed by the destruction of their own airfield, the Army washed its hands of Project X-ray and passed the entire bizarre operation over to the Navy, who quickly handed it down to the Marine Corps under the command of Marine Captain James F. Nelson. The project was reorganized, highly disciplined, and moved to the Dugway Proving Ground in the desolate salt flats of Utah. It was late 1943, and the Marines were determined to prove the weapon's viability with scientific precision. To test the bat bombs accurately, the military constructed a staggering, authentic replica of a Japanese industrial village in the middle of the Utah desert. They imported the exact species of wood, the exact type of paper, and the exact architectural layouts used in Tokyo and Osaka. They wanted to know definitively if the bat bomb was better than a standard high explosive. The December tests at Dugway were chillingly successful. When the bats were dropped over the mock village, they dispersed flawlessly, penetrating deep into the structures exactly as planned. When the time delay fuses triggered, the results were apocalyptic. The mock village was entirely consumed by fire in a matter of minutes. The Chief of Naval Operations ordered a highly detailed statistical analysis of the test. The resulting declassified report was staggering. A standard incendiary bomb drop would typically yield between 167 to 400 individual fires per bomb casing. The bat bomb casing, containing over 1,000 bats, yielded an estimated 3,600 to 4,700 fires. The report concluded that the bat bomb was profoundly more effective than standard incendiary weapons because the fires originated inside the structures, bypassing exterior fireproofing and rendering. Traditional firefighting methods completely useless. By the summer of 1944, Project X-ray had consumed an estimated $2 million, an absolute fortune at the time. The Marine Corps had perfected the cooling, the transport, and the bomb casings. They were ready. The military projected that, by the summer of 1945, they would be able to launch 30 B-24 bombers, dropping over 1 million armed bats on a single Japanese city in one night. The sheer scale of destruction would have been biblical, but the green light never came. Fleet Admiral Ernest J. King abruptly canceled Project X-ray. The official reason was the timeline. The bat bombs would not be combat ready until mid-1945, and the War Department needed a faster resolution in the Pacific. But the true reason was buried behind the highest security clearances in the world. Deep in the desert of Los Alamos, scientists working on the Manhattan Project were finalizing a weapon that did not rely on biology, wind patterns, or animal instincts. They had successfully split the atom. The atomic bomb promised absolute, instantaneous destruction from a single device, rendering the complicated logistical nightmare of a million bat bombs obsolete. Project X-ray was quietly dismantled, its records sealed away in military archives. Dr. Adams returned to his dental practice, forever convinced that his bats could have ended the war with less loss of human life than the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Today, the bat bomb remains one of the most fascinating footnotes of the Second World War. It stands as a chilling monument to the extreme lengths to which human ingenuity will stretch when pushed to the absolute brink. A moment when the United States government spent millions of dollars trying to win a global war using napalm, a dentist from Pennsylvania, and a million sleeping bats.